This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
We are TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Praise ye the Lord. Praise God in his sanctuary. Praise him in the firmament of his power. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. And I thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. I have as special guests with me for the next 2 hours, Andrew Hoy. Andrew, are you there, brother?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hear you really well, brother. And thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. And it's been a while for you as far as coming on radio. You've been very busy and diligent pursuing as far as your recent project 314, which I'll get you to elaborate upon. But if you would, can you tell people where they can go to find out more information about your work and about your website, and also your contact information, and then about the project itself?
Sure. I hope I remember all those. I guess for starts, project314.org, that is the website. I do have a page that is dedicated to contact information, so I got phone, P.O. box, and email, of course, all on that contact page. And as far as what the project's all about, project's about the tabernacle in the wilderness, the one in Exodus that they used coming out of Mount Sinai, coming out of Egypt, and they used that structure as the primary place for worship for about 400 years. Tradition says that the tabernacle is shaped in a rectangular fashion. I have every reason to believe to the contrary, that it was actually arranged in a round courtyard with basically a dome-shaped building. So with this, I think it's a discovery and a kind of a revelation of our time, and figured it out by accident, kind of. So I stumbled upon it by accident. So after I stumbled upon it, I just I guess started really digging in. I spent time in Israel learning Hebrew, and I'm a mechanical engineer, so kind of synthesizing, or I should say harmonizing those two disciplines. I guess this is what you get. So,
well, let's talk a little bit about how it was that you came to this discovery. What was it? Were you in Israel at the time, or where were you? And you were just reading Torah and certain portions as far as about the wilderness tabernacle, and then just thinking about it and putting together the pieces? I mean, what was it that led you to your insight into the revelation on this?
Yeah, it was on the coattails of I wouldn't say epic failure, but I was writing a book. I wrote a book, published it 2013 or 2012, I think. 2012 was, and it was like pushing rope. It was I found it to be a very bloodletting experience from end to end, and I had started that book in 2007. But anyway, from that being a negative experience, I went to a conference in New Mexico, and this was on basically, it's called the Electric Universe Conference, and basically they have a kind of an electric-centric cosmology, if you will, and they see that as being kind of the physics, in place of Newtonian physics, kind of driving the bus as far as everything. So anyway, I went to this conference. It was kind of obscure. I'd never been to one like that before, and I got inspired to write again after I was at the conference on the way back on the plane, and I was just like, no, I'm not writing another book. No. And so I put that off for a year and a half, and it just kind of picked at me and nagged at me a little bit. And so I finally said, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to start. And I was about a chapter into a draft on that, and I was studying the cherubim, and studying the cherubim in particular in Hebrew. One thing that I learned from the first book is to not trust an English translation, because I had to revise my work so many times after I'd found various translation errors and the like. So I started studying the cherubim, and the first occurrence of cherubim is in Genesis with the guarding of the garden, and the second one is in the Exodus, which is described in conjunction with the curtains. And so this is how I stumbled upon curtains. I had no interest in studying the tabernacle, and I started digging into it, and lo and behold, I found what I found in, which is pi, basically. So.
Well, elaborate on that. Okay, you're studying the curtains and the cherubim. You're reading all about the materials of the tabernacle, and then what was it that clicked?
It was really the curtains. I started actually laying them out. My dad's an engineering professor, and he used to say, make a free body diagram with 10 or 11 carries, FBD with TLC. It was kind of his little slogan for that. So it's basically a way of saying draw out the problem. Show pictures of limitations of sizes of things and all that. Because when you draw things out, you visualize them. You're forced to put pen to paper and define a reality in a sense. Mm-hmm. And or an imagined reality. If that doesn't work on a two-dimensional world, it'll never work on a three, obviously. So right. As I'm kind of drawing this out, I had a spreadsheet up and running too, and I was starting to put the numbers down, because I'm kind of a numerology geek a little bit sometimes, and so I started looking at the curtains, and the dimensions of the curtains are 4 cubits by 30 cubits, and they're a quantity 11. Okay, so when you have 11 really long, narrow strips of stuff, get yourself toilet paper and tear off 7 sheets of toilet paper, kind of all in one string. This is kind of what you're dealing with. So it's kind of like a 7-to-1 ratio. That's on the 28. So it's actually 7.5 to 1 ratio. So as I'm just kind of laying out the numbers on the spreadsheet, I see 300 and 330, because if you multiply 30 times 11, you get 330. And then there's one verse in the text, actually two, kind of making reference to, and they folded the last sheet in half. Okay, so when you fold that in half, I said, well, if you fold that in half, that's the last sheet. Instead of adding an extra 30, it's only adding 15. So I said, wow, it's at 315. I'm like, that's really close to pi. Well, or a multiple of pi. I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting. I didn't really think too much of it until I read the next verse. And as I read the next verse, it says, take a little here, a little there, a cubit. And when you realize that, the loops, the curtain, they're made with loops, and the loops overlap. So the amount that the total overlap is 1 cubit. So when I saw, 315 minus 1, I'm like, basically the hairs on my neck stood up, and I'm like, this is pi. This whatever this is being described, this sounds round. And so I didn't even touch the rest of the description. At that point, it wasn't any of the rest of that description that really popped out. Because again, being a little bit lazy sometimes, you're looking at it in English, and that being my first language, we're all kind of slaves to that. And then the translation biases and stuff. There's just so much that, as far as the paradigm, that you need to strip out of there. But, it really begins with the curtains. And guess what? That's why Exodus 26 starts with curtains. Who would think that a structure, if you say, okay, build a house, well, who'd want to start with the drywall? If you're using the drywall, you have to build a frame before you flush out the rest of the the internals, or putting the carpet down, or whatever. So why are curtains important to the design? And because they define the footprint. The same way when you go tent camping, you'll dump out the bag and you'll lay it on the ground, and it's all rolled up, and you got a kind of a snarled mess of a few stakes and poles and ropes, but you have the fabric. And what do you do first? You lay out the fabric, because the fabric defines the footprint of the structure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it is. So
then you put in the poles, and it gives it its shape and props it up, and gives it its form.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. So what was the next thing after you had discovered this pie and realized that it was round? What did you go looking into then to kind of get the rest of it and confirm that you were on the right track with this?
Well, there's so much to deconstruct, to be honest, and I think that the second element was probably associating these curtains with the courtyard. I don't know how much I went through this in the past. It's been a couple of years, and I don't listen to me very often. So actually, I never listen to myself after the recording. But anyway, the way that these relate with the courtyard, it's assumed that the courtyard has linen curtains, and that they're created separate, completely separately from all this. But if you look at the Exodus, I'm literally referring to the 26 chapter 7. I'm sorry, chapter 26, verse 7 through 13. So there's that curtain set, but it doesn't say now hang these up. Frankly, the whole Exodus text is kind of like a game of Simon Says, and do this and do this and do this and do this, and when you start doing whatever you want at your own will, sometimes it's premature. It's foolish. And in the case of the, it's describing these curtains, but it doesn't describe anything to hang them on. And everyone just assumes it gets thrown over the shoebox shape. It's like, well, how that looks. Putting a placemat over a shoebox, it doesn't lay flat, doesn't lay right. But having realized that this was a perimeter, and going into the next thing on the courtyard, because everyone who knows better than me, right, comes up and said, oh, the courtyard's rectangular, it's 100 by 50. They think they got the smoking gun, which just obliterate. I can't say the word.
Yeah.
Destroys. Yeah. Thank you. It destroys my argument, and it's like, no, that doesn't destroy the argument. What you realize is in the Exodus 27, it's talking about two courtyard halves that are being made, and you wouldn't understand that if you didn't go through the rest of 26, realizing the building is spec'd out in halves, and so when I started looking at the math, between the poles, this is another thing. Go and look at any rectangular tabernacle model, and what you'll see is people get all befuddled when it comes to the courtyard, because it says, oh, okay, 20 posts to the south, 20 posts to the north, and to the west there's 10 posts, and to the east, well, it didn't really say that 10 in that sense, but. So everyone just assumes, oh, this form shaped in their mind becomes a rectangle. But if you realize, well, a north half has it has 10 to the west and 10 to the east. So you start seeing how this is kind of a further description drilled down. But one of the things that really struck me was the distance between the posts. The distance between the posts, it talks about there being three posts over a span of 15 cubits. Well, if we remember the curtain of Exodus 26 happens to be 30 long. So, when I realized that what's being spec'd in Exodus 27 was that same set of curtains, or that's how they're being spanned. There's a difference between a hanger and a hanging. And so the curtains are hangings on the hanger, so to speak, and this is where, again, some of the translations hose, because they just didn't understand which ends to connect, which actually is given in 26, and I hadn't realized this right at the onset, but it's making reference to using the cut edges. Well, if you're doing fabric on a loom, what you're going to do is you're going to run the longer thread run. They call it the warp, which is in the greatest length direction. So as you're weaving back and forth, you're not cutting the edges as you weave back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. You have like a shuttle that slides back and forth over the threads or what have you. And you don't cut it along the way. But you start with the cut length end. So, the King James, I think, might say outermost. Use the outermost edges. Well, the outermost, is that, on the far-reaching ones, or is it on the other? Are they on the long edge or the short edge? And I'm saying, these things are definitely called out in the text to be on the short edge. And once you see that, and actually, I think they use the word selvage on in King James too, which is not correct. It's getting into the weaving terms. It's that's making reference to the edge that is not cut. And even the Hebrew word kites is it's the root word is this is where we get our English word cut in cuts in all probability. I mean, I can't prove the etymology, but there's some things that are just so straightforward between Hebrew and English as far as the connections and the similarities, the carryovers, that they're lost in translation too, because they use more dissimilar words. So this, realizing that this post spacing, coincides with the dimension of the curtain, the 30 cubit curtain, and you got 15 cubit post spacings being called out. So traditionally they say, well, 15 divided by 3 is 5, and there's 5 in between. But if I'm taking a section of curtain, I'm supporting it by 3 posts, you can't have just one hanging out there. You'd have 1 in the middle and 2 on the ends. So that's it's a distance of 7.5 and not a distance of 5. And so there's a whole myriad of problems with the assuming the courtyard. I touch on some of these on my website actually. Assuming that the courtyard is rectangular, because again, if you have 20 to the south and 20 to the north on posts, now it says there's 10 to the west. Well, do you put those in between the 20 to the north, 20 to the south, or do you put them on the edge? So if you put them on the edge, on the west edge, now if they're in the corner, you're actually going to have 21 to the south and 21 to the north. So, what are you going to then cut your angles short on the corners so it's more octagonal? I mean, people have gone, I think, probably insane trying to figure this out, and it's because they weren't paying attention at the beginning. So,
So, in your best understanding, then, because there's a question from the chat room with regard to the size and the dimension of the wilderness tabernacle, and so in your best kind of, even though we don't have a visual here, we will put one of your photos together as with the video to show. But can you describe what you see with regard to the dimension, the size of the wilderness tabernacle, and the shapeliness and the formation of it with regard to the courtyards and the sanctums and the outer shell and all?
Yeah, so the outer is pretty straightforward, and this is part of the courtyard math that's being described in Exodus 27. You've got this issue of the width and the length. So the word for length is I guess getting into this issue of point of reference. Anytime you're taking a measurement, you gotta take use something, a standard as a point of reference. There's a from point and a to point, a start point and an end point. And I'm saying that these the courtyard is basically made in halves, and it's made if I have 2 half circles, what's the width of if the circumference is 314, that means the diameter of that is 100. You have the radius of a circle, happens to be 50. And I was actually, when I was in Israel, kind of doing research, I was talking to one of the guides at Shiloh, and I remember him saying to another one of the guides who knew the topic a little better, and the guy who he was a fluent Hebrew speaker. He says to his friend, "Mazeh chamashim b'chamashim." What's this 50 and 50? This is how the Hebrew is describing the courtyard. 50 and 50, or 50 housing 50. So we have different measurement reference points and standards that when I say go to the store and get a 2x4, I'm talking about the cross section of a board. You might ask, do you want 92 inches or 96 inches? Are they for studs? Do you need 12 footers? I mean, but 2x4 is it's jargon that's familiar to our day and our language, and this is why the people don't understand the dimensions on just the raw materials. So if you hose up the dimensions on the raw materials and these partial assembly things and descriptions, you're gonna end up in left field. So one of these words is translated as length, the other one's translated as width, and I think that's describing one half of the courtyard at a time, it seems. And I guess there's getting into the point of reference thing. So if it's at the head or the center of the of the courtyard, or the center of the building, again, that is the courtyard reference and dimension. So when it says it's 100 wide, or I'm sorry, 100 long, with it being a circle, it really applies in any direction because that's the nature of a circle. It's always the same, the same spread.
Uh-huh.
So with the rest of the building, the rest of the building is governed by, again, the curtain perimeters, and I guess the question is if you have a certain number of parts, how do you lay them out in a way where they will stand, as far as structurally, where they meet all the exacting descriptions of Exodus, and that shape is very very dome-esque, and there's people, I think, being polite and not inclined to confront me on this assertion is, and usually they're not inclined to challenge because they don't have a bedrock of knowledge about this, and generally everyone I talk to has no Hebrew background on something like this, so it's just hard for them to bring up anything that would challenge us. So people think this is like, oh, isn't this creative? Look how he's rearranged all the pieces according to his imagination. I think, again, I really think people are pretty silent on that, but frankly, I think that they lack the confidence and the knowledge base and the courage to challenge what I'm putting forth, and so they just sit idly by and sheepish, and they don't say what they're really thinking, because otherwise I think there would be a more how would I say ambitious response in something like this. If I discovered something like that, if you found in a cave in the Qumran sites, pile of stuff, like Jim Barfield believes that he knows where all the tabernacle stuff is based on the Copper Scroll. People are excited about that as like, oh, maybe there's kind of the treasure there, but like Indiana Jones said, you want to be a good or most good archaeology is done in the library. That's what he said in the first movie, although he changed that on the motorcycle with the is it Shia LaBeouf or whatever, on the fourth movie, when he says, if you want to be a good archaeologist, you got to get out of the library. So I actually did both. I went into the shop, I went to Israel, and I'm sorry, but I found this in the library. The irony is the people running around kicking up dirt in Shiloh and looking under pottery fragments. They think that they found a fragment of a fragment. They think they have the foundation of the tabernacle squared away, and people they come up to me from time to time and say, oh, what about Shiloh? Or have you been to Shiloh? Or, oh, you got to go to Shiloh, because they've had some emotional experience there, because the site is kind of this historical park a little bit, and they got people digging through shards of pottery and the like, and they have some plateau areas, but they find a few areas on a flat clearing, or it's not a total clearing, but it's strangely shaped bedrock. And the Mishnah, the tradition on the Mishnah is something like that they use stone walls, or reinforce the walls with stone. Well, if you take the tabernacle courtyard posts, okay, here's a news flash to everyone who, again, just thinks that they got all the answers, and you can go into Google or image search and take a look at this. Most people are showing the tabernacle courtyard is using wood posts. Okay, wood posts. I'm sorry, wood etz is not listed in the Exodus 27 description at all, at all. And yet there's only a little bit of copper. And they translate the word for copper is you got Ednei Kesef. I'm sorry, Ednei Nechosheth. They translate this.
Hold on, Andy. Hold on. We'll be right back, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody. Andy, I want to just turn it back over to you and get you to finish up your thought. And then also, if you would, can you describe what it is that actually is holding up the tabernacle and spacing it and giving it its form?
Okay, let me, I guess, finish up on this courtyard post issue, right? So, courtyard posts happen to be, there's altogether, you're given 70 shekels of, I'm sorry, shekels, 70 kikar or talents to use, throughout the entire project, with the exception of the basin, which was made from kind of independent donation of the women, the mirrors of the women who used to help around the tent of meeting, what have you. Anyway, the courtyard posts, I encourage your listeners to take this up, this point up as a point of challenge. Go and find a courtyard post that's less than 4 inches, less than 6 inches, in size. And I say that because let's face it, when you read a Bible, who knows what these dimensions are? Everyone's like, I don't buy salt, bags of salt for the water softener and talents. I don't measure out. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something you measure in weight in small weights. If I'm going and buying nuts at the store, I'm not weighing out the nuts in units weight of shekels. And so these dimensions are far from us, but it's not to say that they're impossible to figure out. There's some variance in ancient size, correlations or whatever. You need to convert the units, I guess, long and short of it. So, anywhere between 35 pounds and 120 pounds, but generally between 70 and 75 pounds is what the kikar or the talent is treated as, by people who've studied it far longer than I have. And so not only is 70 or 75 an average value, it's a pretty practical value, because if you think about, how much weight can a person lift. When I used to work at the grocery store, loading salt into people's cars and everything, the small bags are 40s, and the big ones are 80s, and that was part of the to be a bag boy, you had to lift an 80-pound bag of salt. That was part of the requirements. It's a practical, human limit where you don't have to be Hercules to be lugging it around. Anyway, with 70 being or 75 being that number of pounds, so you basically you have either 60 posts if you're assuming a rectangular court arrangement, or I'm basically saying no, you've got 40 posts around, or let's say 42, 44, depending upon how you're defining things, with the court gate and everything, but only having 70 talents, so that's about 70 pounds apiece. Well, these things are also 5 cubits high, so then you have to ask the question, well, how heavy or how long is a cubit, right? But going back to the post diameter and say, well, how thick of a post can that make? It can't make anything any bigger than 2 inches, and yet, the guys running around Shiloh thinking that they've got, they found gold practically from finding a square hole cut into the bedrock that, to me looks like it was, made for a 4x4 post or bigger. So unless they threw away all the original post material that they used, at the time of Sinai between there and Shiloh, I'm sorry. That whatever you think is a hole there, for all it's a sheep pen hole, or the local ancient McDonald's at the time or whatever. To say it was a structure, okay, you can maybe demonstrate it archaeologically, but this is because they've got this gate post that's what they think is a post hole, or a couple of them. They think they found 2 or 3 of them, and it seems to be resembling what a rectangular courtyard shape is. They think they have, they think they got the answer, and they're, the confidence. I guess it's perception is 3/4 of reality or whatever, right? So, so they can show people that, and nobody checks, nobody does the math. The math is not that hard. This is something that your 6th grader, you should certainly be able to do. If not, maybe your 8th grader with some of the calculations if you're rolling density into it. But since the Bible times, I don't think the density of copper's changed any. So yeah, it becomes what is credible. For the courtyard, these jumbo posts that they put around the thing, they're not credible. You do not have the quantity material. First of all, you don't have wood being allocated, and second of all, you don't have the quantity of copper that you need to make that happen. So these things alone, scholastically speaking, they're embarrassments. They should be points of embarrassment for anything that's considered to be peer reviewed in times past. So I just wonder, these people asleep at the switch or what? I don't know. It's a curious thing. Tradition's a powerful thing, and people been clinging to it. Images will they latch into people's brains, and they have a hard time shaking them. The whole cognitive dissonance problem, I guess. So.
Well, what people believe they know shapes their reality, and no matter if it contradicts what you see every day, still what you think of the creation and what you've been told of the dynamics of it, you mold and then filter all of that and all of what you see according to such belief, and then so that shapes the reality, even though what might be real is in contradiction to it. But yet, it's such a strong thing to have somebody, through words and theories and what they project on the TV or what they postulate as a professional opinion, that overrides your senses and overrides, what is, and will create this whole dream of what people think and consider reality to be. And so, I think that's a large part of what we're dealing with, contending with.
My discovery, it could be in a sense likened to the kid who chucked a rock, to scare the sheep out of the cave at Qumran. You can say, well, what of these actions are divinely inspired? There's a proverb that it goes something like, the king's heart is like a water course. He directs it wherever he pleases. Meaning the Almighty does.
Uh-huh.
And so the fact that we're sometimes puppets on a string is, for whatever purpose. So just when I discovered that, I wouldn't have seen the 314, but it was so bizarre. And I guess to your earlier points on just being conditioned into one thing and one line of thinking, if I was starting from scratch and had my English Bible open and saying that I'm gonna lay out how this thing works for myself. You're not doing it for yourself at that point. You're not an independent mind. because of that visual bias. It's part of your knowledge base. And in reality, Zen, you have two things. It's so simple. You have, does it go A or B? Do you connect on these edges or on these edges? I mean, these are the questions of a child.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really. I mean, what with them being so crude, and so even if I said, well, do it on the outermost edges, well, you still have got this little gap in English. You mean, if I gave you a sheet that was rectangular, and I said, well, do it on the outermost edge, well, you'd probably ask me for clarification on what edge, because it's not a normal way for us to describe an edge on a sheet necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But no one has thrown out the or question before. And I guess, further thing is getting into the literal side of the text. Well, the text talks about how there's supposed to be loops on both sides of the curtains, okay? So if there are loops on both sides of the curtains, so it may be connected to the adjacent one, well, then which curtains don't get connected? Well, according to tradition, you don't have to connect the ones on the end. You're just making loops on the sheet just in case you scramble up the sheets different, and that way it's kind of like, Eli Whitney and his interchangeable, gun parts or cotton gin parts. And, that the idea that all the parts within the tabernacle would be designed interchangeably, to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if it's in sheets where you're taking apart, you're putting them together. Why call out 11 sheets, 30 by 4, and then to join all of them with fabric loops, with the exception of the one between the 5th set and the 6th set where you're using basically brass buttons. So why are we putting brass buttons in the middle of a dimension that ends up being shaped? It's 42 by 30 if you fold over the last curtain in half. So why make this big long rectangular swatch only when you're starting with the 11 narrow strips? Why would Moses care about how wide these strips are if he just said, hey, go make 2 fabric sets or 1 fabric set, 42 by 30, we'll call it good. Make it out of wool. 42 by 30. I don't care how you get there. No, and so when you connect it on the wrong edge, that the value of the subassembly of the initial lengths, they don't matter when you start with that. But if you're connecting it again according to the right edge, and this is where the absence of critical thinking is, when you're putting something together and it feels like it's going together wrong. If you don't stop and sniff it out, you'll never. If we're looking to observe the Bible or the Torah without any expectation of reason, well, then we've got a creator who's how would I say, just manipulative, and we're here doing these things for his entertainment and not for our own benefit. For what purpose does man exist? Just to go through some idle, useless motions? I mean, what does it say about a commandment about a creator who issues commandments without purpose? I mean, that's twisted in my mind. I can't wrap my mind around that. It's just so lopsided, it's so crooked that this is where they've taken us, and this is where we've allowed them to take us, where we've consented to go in a lot of cases.
Yeah, but the truth of it is that every word and the placement and everything in the way and its order, it's all for reason, and there's all significance behind everything with regard to the study of the scriptures. And so everything is meaningful. Nothing is just random or just arbitrarily assigned in pattern or word association. That everything comes together in a meaningful manner in the way that the scriptures laid it out. And so so tell us about your bringing this forward and sharing, because I know that they did publish an article about you and your work in the Israeli newspapers, and that you went over there and met with certain people. So can you talk about that and what you brought forth to them and how receptive they were, and not just there in Israel, but in other places here in America and abroad?
Well, I guess let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
Before the Israel thing, and going back to right before I went on Rob's show, I had given a presentation at a couple of different places, kind of live in person with PowerPoints and the like, and I asking for a show of hands, and you can say this is not a I'm trying to think of this outfits that do the surveys that to assume they're scientifically accurate and impartial. I just said, okay, among 80 people who heard, I would say, okay, show of hands who used to think the tabernacle is rectangular. All the hands go up. I said, okay, show of hands who still think it is. All the hands go down, except for one. And I knew the guy, but he was serious in his opposition. But anyway, so then I show of hands everyone who thinks it's round, and the hands go back up. Well, I talked to one of the people in that congregation group, what have you, a couple months later, and so this was like I want to say December time frame. So after Rob's show, and by the time the Parsha came up again, which is Teruma, which is this Exodus 25 through 27 portion, which is coming up again Saturday, and that's why I wanted to do this date right now, so people could have all this fresh in their mind and kind of have at it, dig in. But after I did the couple days, I shouldn't say couple days, couple hour, I did 2 presentations over the course of a few hours, and in this case they're drinking from a fire hose, and the paradigm shift is more than they can keep pace with, and the knowledge. I mean, I studied this whole thing, got it worked out. It's in my mind like it's set in by concrete almost now, but I had a lot more time to ponder, whereas other people, they're not as familiar, they're not necessarily interested or have any incentive in and for it, and so after that, about half of them then lose their sense of certainty, like, oh, this is how it really is, and part of it is no one was interested enough to buy my drawings. I had like an exegesis drawing set that I started offering very early on in the onset of the project, and it's concise. When I say concise, I have it dialed all down to 4 pages, so it's not a long read, but I kind of liken it to IKEA. If you can follow the instructions to set up an IKEA bookshelf, or desk, you can follow these through. So you don't have to be hyper technical, but you have to pay attention, and you have to read and look and all. So most people they're really not engaging at that level for whatever reason. But going into Israel, so I guess it was my intention of developing a trailer, and when I say a trailer, a video trailer, to present all this stuff. And I guess it partly dawned on me that storyline is a very important part of this whole revelation expression, and because I tend to be a facts and figures geek, maybe more than most people can stomach. They just want the part of the story and the climax and the characters and the good versus evil contest, or what unresolved questions to be answered, and so that being so central to this, I started developing a trailer, and then I was interrupted by a guy who contacted me, who said he was interested in building a model, a scale model. So he's a professional model maker, and so that cost me a couple of months too, because I ended up between making some detailed plans and then between the erection plans and all the part detailing, it's a lot of work to put all that information together. So I did that so he could construct, so he could build. He would have enough to build on. The drawings I have on my website are nothing like this other set. This is like 40 pages worth of content. So I developed that for for that first model. Again, how do you erect this, a building, 6 stories tall in the wilderness without any crane? So that's part of this whole, dare I say, experiment, exploration, research, etc. So anyway, I got him, enough content where he could start building, and then had another friend going to Israel, and I thought, well, this would be a very excellent opportunity to, settle all things in my mind, as well as, possibly, try to muster up support and some publicity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is, go back to the Jews, who are, native Hebrew speakers. And I spent about 6 weeks in Israel, between talking to, this expert, that expert, this guy in the street, that guy in the street, and also going to some of the sites, Shiloh is one where the tabernacle once was, down along the Jordan, Gilgal, went to, I'm trying to think, Ariel, they have a shoebox model up there. In Timnah, they have a shoebox model. Went the city of David, visited that for a while. So there's a number of different, sites and kind of engagements along the way. But, overall, what's interesting is I can take my 4-page exegesis set. I can bring that up to a Israeli, and here I am, speaking kindergarten Hebrew with them, and trying to explain. I mean, this is like the irony of ironies, and it's like, and the majority reaction I got was like, wow, or like, kind of amazed and like, that clicks finally type thing. But there's still there's such a strong stigma among religious Jews in Orthodoxy to challenge anything in, when I say status quo, by status quo I mean, anything according to the esteemed sages of blessed memory type thing. Come against Rashi, Rambam. They don't necessarily know what Rashi or Rambam says, but if you're not Jewish, you have no right to protest, even though Rashi and Rambam don't agree with each other on how the frame is made. You look up Art Scroll, okay? Get a Rambam Exodus, Shemot Art Scroll volume edition, Book of Exodus with Rambam commentary. Do you know what he says about this set of curtains?
What's that?
Nothing. And
how convenient.
This is not to say he has nothing profound to offer, but to almost deify him, as they do within that tradition. According to Rambam, that this is where the 613 number comes up. Well, you want to count 613 commandments? I dare anyone to. And this didn't occur to me till a few months ago, to just see how the tabernacle fits into the alleged 613. So everyone running around in the Torah communities is just parroting 613 commandments in the Torah, 613, and well, I don't see actually within Exodus 26 and 27, Rambam only credits one of these commandments as being commandments, and it has to do with keeping the oil burning continually. Well, I'm sorry, but if you haven't built a tabernacle and a menorah, what's the point of keeping the oil going? And so the other commandments that are recognized in the 613 are as part of the 613 are to have people standing guard outside the tabernacle, and to so there's the prohibitive version, and then there's the positive side of do it, and then there's the negative side of don't not do it, and so this is considered to be some sort of theological genius, while every commandment about building the tabernacle in Exodus 26 and 27 is omitted from that list. I just don't get it. And actually, they replace the one tabernacle commandment, I think in Exodus 25, have them build me a sanctuary so that I may dwell among them, right? And so what you hear is, or what you see in translation, is have them build a sanctuary. Like, oh, this is now a common command for the temple too, and we're going to just transfer this commandment. We're gonna dump all this knowledge in Exodus 26:27. Imagine this being a red letter Bible. Everyone in the Christian world likes the red letter Bible. This is where Jesus spoke. But well, what about let there be light? Why isn't that red letter? Why aren't all the words in Leviticus red letter? There's more thus saith the Lord in Leviticus than any other book of the Bible.
Right.
And so why are we taking the red letters away from Exodus 26:27? Thus saith the Lord type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing that it goes back to the whole thing where people ask the questions, they don't think critically, and so let's just keep on keeping on the way we've been keeping on because we're alive and it works and change is hard. But what was I going to bring up with that 6:13? So getting into this, within Judaism, and this is the wonderful thing I find about the Jews is they're open-minded generally to tolerate dialogue. You've got the whole the Talmud presenting position A and position B, and it's through argument over the scriptures where we hone our reasoning. And this makes them very, open to talk about stuff like this.
Hold on, brother. Hold on. We'll be right back for second hour, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody, for second hour. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. And I have a special guest with me, Andy Hoy of the Project 314. Andy, wanted to give you a chance to finish up on your thought, but also when you get a chance, there's a question from the chat room with regard to the third temple, and if you know anything about that or if you can comment on that at all. Okay,
we'll try. Let's go. I guess back to this Jewish slogan. Where there's two Jews, there's three opinions. They like to bring that up. They bring that up themselves. That's it's not to fault them. It's I guess in my mind it's to applaud them because thinking objectively you're gonna think differently than the guy next to you. And what I really respect about that within their culture, within their systems of orthodoxy is they get into tolerance, and it's not necessarily unconditional tolerance, but if we're not forbearing with people who have different opinions, then we're not, then where are we going, with our whole, religious quest, etc. The guy who is hosting the exhibit in Ariel, I played air hockey with his grandson. I didn't start until this point of opposition and everything like that, but to say that his intentions are not good in displaying the shoebox, that would be extremely ambitious in a negative way on my part, and baseless overzealous. So getting into what's another person's intention just because they have different understanding doesn't mean they have ill intents. And so getting into talking, introducing this to the Jews are very, very much more accustomed to opposing opinions, and that's why I like that climate they create, rather than saying, okay, it's time to make another denomination now because we disagree over, ironically in English, preposition that the translators use. I mean, there have been, Christian schisms, because of that, and you have. I heard there's more Christian denominations than there are verses in the New Testament, and I have no reason to disbelieve that. I guess having seen, people will argue things to death, where it's like, well, this is all a matter of just belief anyway. And is this belief going to change the actions of you today or tomorrow? And some of these things, the answer is no. It's just the fact that you perceive reality in one way or the other doesn't. If it doesn't govern your behavior, then let it go. Just if you can express opinions civilly, then yeah, argue it out and work through it. There's a reason that we have different views, and it's so that we can challenge and be challenged, and sometimes be right, sometimes be wrong, I guess. So. Mm-hmm. You're thinking of the third. I guess I have that.
Yeah, just any comment on that. Not
okay.
that it applies to the project or anything, but just
yeah, getting into Third Temple things. What's interesting, I guess. I have on my website a one picture of what one author made 100 years ago in I think a guy's name is Holly, if I'm not mistaken. He was a Christo-Philadelphian or some such thing, which is a very certain Christian sect of some sort. They still exist in some capacity, just they're not huge in numbers. But anyway, he had believed that the Ezekiel's temple actually had a round border around it. And he draws it with a kind of circular wall thing. And he uses the reasoning he had is, as I recall, and I'm stretching back 3 years now and happening upon this. He uses the Hebrew word saviv, which is spelled with a samech, bet vav bet, and so you've got some interesting thing going on here with either the letters in the Aramaic style or the Paleo style. The samech tends to be represented as a tack. In more modern Hebrew, and the Aramaic script, it looks more or less like a English O almost, like a ring. And so that right there is just one letter that points to a circle. Then you have a bet, a vav, and a bet. And the bet is in the ancient, again, the word bait is to mean house or tent. And so the actual letter that they used in the original Hebrew was representing tent walls. And so here you have that with the vav. And what is a vav? It's like a stake or a joiner, like our English word and. When I say and, you're going to expect that you see peanut butter and jelly. You're putting two things together. So your two tent halves are being represented by the spelling of Saviv, and this is what I don't think Cully went quite into all that paleo, but he's basically saying that this Saviv word means around, and you see the same word appear towards the back end of Exodus 27 to describe the courtyard. So I wouldn't say he'd ever put two and two together like that, but the fact that he's presenting Ezekiel's temple, in this way, he was, when I say just on, I think to the beginning of it, to the start of it. I would have no reason to believe that the pattern would be different from this tabernacle. Moses was told, make sure you make everything according to the pattern shown to you, Bahar. And when I say Bahar, so you got the bet is again the house, and the hay and the resh. Hay and resh, har is like mount, like Har Sinai, Har Armageddon, Har Megiddo. So you have the har is it's speaking to a mountain, and so pattern shown in the mountain. Well, guess what? Guess what? Melting down here. Pattern in the mountain. Sorry, yeah, lost my train of thought. But okay, so this idea is, it's somewhat synonymous with pregnancy. So you have, Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived. It's conceived as tahar, and so you have this, this mounding, concept is being described, and as the tabernacle is being introduced, and then later on throughout the Tanakh, you're seeing this whole mountain of the Lord concept being this is again translation, so it's actually tied into the sacred Yod He Vav He name. So with this and that being the mountain, so is it that the structure itself is the mountain that's being referred to? Kind of a different twist on that. So how does this relate to the Ezekiel? I've opted to not trying to push that or advance that in exegesis, because first and foremost is this one. When I say first and foremost, you show me a description in all the Tanakh, all the Old Testament, or take New Testament text if you like, and say, well, this is what the house of God is like. Okay, the tabernacle is listed twice in Exodus. The first parsha being Teruma, which again for this Saturday, so you got 3 chapters, including the furniture, dedicated to this, holy thing, and then it pops up again in the back end of Exodus, where it basically says, and Moses made it just the way it was called for. So it's, you got that as a second witness, as a reiteration of what was originally called out. So everyone is, I think that thinking backward is thinking forward. I guess I'll say that, because if we want to look at other structures in the absence of this pattern, if Moses is called the greatest of the prophets, and in the book of Numbers, it's my recollection of how he's the most humble man, and he's the only one who spoke to the Almighty face to face, and this and that. So why is it that we want to think of this tent as a jalopy, as a desert accident? You go to Israel and you march around in the bookstores, and that's what I did. I was thinking, wouldn't this be part of a great storyline to say, look, since the Jews are young, they're being indoctrinated with the shoebox and this and that. No, that's not a true thought. I thought, well, it's suspicion. That's a reasonable suspicion, right? But what they're interested in is the temple. They're not interested in the unglory days of the desert. Right. They love the temple. The temple. They don't want to think about trudging through the sand again as slaves with who are being displaced and nothingness. They don't want to identify with that, even though 1/25 of the liturgical year is focused on this very structure. Yeah. You have 50 chapters of the Bible making reference to this, and so I think it's time to shift this paradigm of again is if there's nothing new under the sun, and that which has been shall be again. Well, my question, why not the tabernacle? Mm-hmm. There's just people who debate whether or not the tabernacle is that the tent is something that will rise again. In those days, I'll restore David's fallen tent. Is kind of thing. So is he talking figuratively about the Davidic line, or is this making reference to Judaic rule? You could take a number of different angles on that, but why exclude this tabernacle as being possibility of a prophetic or a I guess prophetic fulfillment in any way?
Well, let me ask you this then as well. Well, you would think that this would also come up more just around like the Feast of Tabernacles, with regard to the memorial of them building the temporary dwellings, and how it was that they were wandering through the wilderness during that time, and that the wilderness tabernacle being associated with that Exodus and all that would come up more. But I wanted to ask you specifically what you thought about the what Lucifer says when he says, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. Um, what do you, what's your take on that as far as the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north? And also, what do you consider with New Jerusalem and its possible shape and all that? And do you think there's connections here with the Wilderness Tabernacle in any way?
Trying to think of that citation there. Your the first one you mentioned.
Isaiah 14.
Yeah, I thought it was an Isaiah world, but let me. I guess getting into New Jerusalem first. So the idea of Yer being a city, and shalom, is this idea of a peaceful city. And I think a lot of things in Hebrew are both and it's not to say there can't be any either ors, but the Hebrew I see as being so deep and inclusive and comprehensive that when I hear the word Jerusalem, I think above and beyond just the one thing that we're seeing is the city. You got the old city, and then you got kind of some of the quote quote new city built around the old city. So when we talk in terms of New Jerusalem, and again, is that renewed Jerusalem? I have I'm more inclined to say that how would I say this? I'd be more inclined to say, that between Hebrew or Aramaic, being the language of the New Testament as opposed to Greek, as getting into primacy and supremacy. Both of those are very, much at the forefront of my mind. I've done, marginal study in Aramaic, and I've looked at, some of these arguments for those things, and I'm very sympathetic to anything in the the more eastern eastern point of origin. So this paradigm that we kind of put into this New Jerusalem, it kind of comes to us through this filter of Western Christendom and so forth. I happened upon a guy on the web as I was looking for images and round images and things like that. He was basically advocating that the New Jerusalem should be holographic, which is, it's like, okay, I hadn't quite thought of that. But he recommended this most interesting book, and it was called Dimensions of Paradise by what's the author's name on that? Anyway, within Dimensions of Paradise, they talk about the New Jerusalem and the perfect city-state, and this actually, some of it going back into the Greeks and getting into numerology and how these things seem to be relating to a round structure, round layout. He opens up the book with I think it's John Mitchell's his name maybe. He opens it up with this reference to the New Jerusalem and how it relates to the 144,000 and all that kind of stuff. So 12,000, 12,000, 12,000. So if you start laying these things out, so it's when I say it's a heavy read. When I say heavy, I'm practically guaranteeing that you would like it, Zen, based on some of the different things you've studied, and I'm sure it would click more with you than it would with me because you've studied more of these ancient texts than I have. Mm-hmm. But he really hones in on some of this what is referred to as sacred geometry, which is having to do a lot with shapes and solids and how they're used, harmony of the universe and within life and living systems and those sorts of ideas that the ancients held on some of these things and how they seem to still practically relate to things that are biblical. Mm-hmm. Basically the typical Christian worldview, it seems to be that if it's not in the Bible, it's automatically heretical. And
Yeah, right.
the idea that there can be truth outside the Bible, they're uncomfortable with that, and getting into the study of the zodiac, etc. These are other things that, yes, I agree they've been corrupted. Yes, I think that you have no business worshiping the created, heavenly
Mm-hmm.
beings and things, and but that's not to say that's the whole scope of that study. That it used to be that the word science, 400 years ago, encompassed all fields of knowledge, including, what we consider today to be metaphysical. So now we say, well,
Right.
we're going to exclude the metaphysical from any body of knowledge, and now we're smarter because we're naturalists. It's like, well, that's a philosophy, and the month that this philosophy it thrives within not only Western culture, but it's basically embedded itself within Western Christendom as we know it, I think so.
Mm-hmm. Well, one more question, and then I'd like to get back to your project and your work. With regard to the Mazzaroth and the stars and the story of the stars, have you studied much into that? And do you think that the Mazzaroth basically portrays the same story of salvation that the gospel does?
I tried reading Bullinger, Number and Scripture. I had a hard time with it. That's not to say I'm opposed to it. But getting into the way that the images are shown and everything, the gospel and the stars thing, I think there's merit to that concept. When I think of Mazzaroth, Zodiac, etc., I can't help but think of the round tabernacle.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
we know this one guy named Abraham, right? Well, what was said of his offspring? They would be like what?
Right. Number
Yes.
of the stars. Huh?
Right. So the way that they are encamped, and the way that relates to heavens, and again, this is an occult saying made popular by people who are in this more occultist type mindset, the as above, so below. And I think that is, if I'm not mistaken, that's kind of regurgitated in the New Testament in some capacity, or reiterated, I should say. Right, the as above, so below.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of what neighborhood that's in off the top of my head, but that notion that the things in the heavens are represent things on earth, and vice versa. So should we be super surprised that that principle bears some truth? That bears some, I'm not saying everything is in total exactness, but why is that something that we shouldn't consider to be possible?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right that there is merit to it when you examine it. In my opinion, that's the story that is relayed. It's the same thing with Genesis 3:15. One of the oldest prophecies about the seed of the woman being born of a virgin would crush the head of the serpent, and it seems to be played out also in the Mazzaroth. But I want to go back to your project and ask you with regard to the importance of it and why it is that people should examine this and look into it and hold it relevant.
Oh boy. The biggest fall there is. So,
Mm-hmm.
let's start with when I say the new on the old. So you have this thing out of the book of Romans where it says, without the law we wouldn't know what sin is. Okay, we have the book of Matthew saying, without you talk about jots and tittles of what? It's not talking about Greek jots or Greek tittles. It's talking about the exactness within the Hebrew language. And so if we have this, not all this will be fulfilled. Getting in this idea of what this fulfillment is. Until all is accomplished, not a single one of these words will be taken away. All the stuff remains true. Good and evil are still measured, like it or not, according to Moses' law. Right and wrong according to Moses' law. If everything the law hangs in the prophets, so the whole love your neighbor as yourself. Love Lord your God, all your heart, soul, and mind. Okay, so if they say that every commandment can be dialed into the 10, or funneled into the 10, and that the 10 can always be funneled into the 2, well, is this to say, well, we should just say dumb down, just remembering only 2 things? I mean, we have 10 fingers, right? Incidentally, the tabernacle has 10 toes too. They're 10 fingers, but that's another story I'm not looking to get into right now. But the 10ness, all this stuff was revealed to through Moses. Not for nothing. It was all given for purpose, with purpose, and this is no exception. Now, getting into the modern use of this to help contextualize this. Where are people today with respect to their their theological ambitions? Okay, well, let's go and build a church. Let's go build a synagogue. Where does it ever say? First of all, synagogue is having to do with an assembly, and the word for it, root words, no different than for church. Between Old and New Testament, and yet in English they make points of distinction to call one and one the other. Well, the Jews have synagogues and the Christians have churches. No, that's not true to the etymology of the words, tied into in the Greek even on that, as I understand. So getting back to this concept of what did the Almighty ever command people to build? Okay, there's Noah in the ark. That was thing number 1. That was big. But you can't say that every generation was given the commandment to build an ark. It's like one guy, he was told, hey, everything's going to flood. And by the way, people as a testament to their faith have dropped $100 million on building a replica of Noah's Ark for a flood that will never happen, and for a boat that'll never float. So this is where philosophically we've gone today. We're that far into that. So the tabernacle, in contrast with making okay.
Hold on, we're at another break already.
Okay.
All right, we'll be right back, everyone, for final segment. All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. Certainly, this show is going by really quickly, but I'm going to turn it back over to you, Andy, with regard to the relevancy of your work and why people should hold it as important. But also, I want you to consider, with all the renewed interest in the cosmology, the enclosed world system, and others, don't you think that this is kind of a confirming witness to that line of thought as well, and to the Genesis narrative when you review the work of the layout of creation and how it's totally implausible with what science has postulated and put forth with regard to the whole Copernican heliocentric model?
Well, the one thing, I guess, let me finish up on a half thought on
Sure.
on the idea of what is good for man to do, what is good for man to not, and people are starting to getting back and examining the Torah, and that is, in my mind, an exceptional moral good, with just bringing about awareness of the project.
Very important.
And then the issue of building. Well, guess what? People are they're trying to observe the feasts. These biblical feasts. Which afraid to say are not Christmas and Easter. They're called out. They're defined at this time where, guess what? They got the tabernacle. The tabernacle, the thoroughness of the tabernacle's instruction is given after the mention of the feast. But the mention of the feasts that precede the tabernacle are like keep 3 feasts to me a year. And there's probably no more than 5-10 verses on that. I guess even less than 5. In Exodus after the 10 Commandments up until the time that this tabernacle was built. So they only made it a year out of Egypt before this became important. And now we have people are starting to say, hey, I want to get back and observing these feasts. Everyone makes kosher marshmallows. They spend time shopping for those. And, you've got people are into their prayer shawls and challah and tzitzit and Davidic dancing. Well, guess what Davidic dancing is? They're trying to dance in a circle all the time. Which is the idea of chagag is the root having to do with this idea of dancing. And it has to do with dancing in a circle. So you want to go back to the Torah again. 81 commandments on this for the tabernacle, and I can't find a single scripture in all of the Bible rescinding these commandments. And so you can say, well, there's a progressive revelation, and well, you have to prove to me how superior these other later structures are to the one that was defined this way. Even David, after he gets his revelation, wants to build, and he's told, hey, when did I ever say I needed a house of cedar? I'm quite content with this tent that I have, and you're not going to build this thing anyway. And the fact that Solomon then took up on it, but the revelation of that isn't even in the Bible texts. There's there's 2 descriptions of Solomon's temple. But so getting back into the why this matters, is to say, does Moses' revelation matter, or where does it sit as far as its supremacy in dictating human things? You want to talk about a learning model, and I guess just touching on cosmology briefly. You have this concept. He spreads out the heavens like what? Like a tent. Now, I don't care if you're a baller or a flat Earth person, and you say, well, this is it's more representative of cosmology than either one, or I'm sorry, than any of the rectangular models anyone's ever created.
Uh-huh.
Look at the way the curtains hang down. If Psalms, I want to say it's 104 or something, he spreads out the heavens like a curtain. Okay, so the curtain, it's the same word yiriyah, I think, is in Psalms there, as in the Hebrew for the curtains in Exodus 26. Well, how are these curtains spread out? Okay, they start at the horizon. In any rectangular model, what you're going to have is these curtains are above ground in the first set, and also the second set, which are laying on it. So they're not even, in a sense, meeting where the Earth is. So look at the horizon. Look at planetariums. How do they show stars in a planetarium? It's a dome. It's the horizontal coordinate system, which is, when I say a half dome overhead. If I'm standing on anywhere on Earth is kind of like a plain land, whatever. I can walk in a circle, or I can rotate my body in a circle. I can look overhead, and that this sphere, this half sphere that sits above us, in either way, again, whether you're a what do you call it, a heliocentric or a geocentric person, either way, this is much more tied into reality. You want to make a practical witness to the Almighty and His house, and say, well, this is what His word represents. Well, there's right now at least 10, or probably around at least 10 full size tabernacle models which have it wrong. Does it bother anyone that this what do I call it? This representation we have, it's like a standing, in my opinion, stick in the eye of the Almighty, because it's like, this isn't what He said. It's not remotely what He said. You can't. All these people are cheating the way that they build, and it's not an accurate representation. But if people want to advance, the other idea that, this is what the heavens represent. And I guess I'm kind of at a loss why people wouldn't want to, start building this. Again, you look at what people have put into churches, $200 million on a Brazilian replica of Solomon's temple. Like I said, this to do it in full scale with silver and gold would cost half of what they've done for Noah's Ark. And so even if this is just, being put up for a learning purpose, I think is a tremendous value as far as the witness, the witness to the world, and it's the wake up, like, hey, we've had a lot of things wrong, and this is one of them. And you imagine, the establishment needing to fess up on this about, the way they did not have the pattern. I mean, it's I'm not looking to do huge battle with the establishment, but to wake people up from the system that rewards apathy, encourages it. I think it's shameful. I want nothing to do with that. But I don't know. I'm rambling now. Sorry.
Let's with the last part. Let's go into your book, what you've been working on, and the video stuff that you're going to be coming out with. Just all of what you're going to be releasing with this particular project, where people go to find it, to purchase it, the images, and anything of that nature, so that people can support your work.
Yeah. Okay. So as kind of a follow up, post Israel, after the Breaking Israel News article published, and I shared that with Rob, and that audience got some attention. Happened upon this guy named Brian, and Brian he starts he happens to be an engineer, and he starts asking me all these questions about, like, are these drawings, are they enough to build with? I'm like, not exactly, but I have this other pile for this other guy who's interested in the model. So over the course of between the back end of 2016 and through this last summer, I was pretty preoccupied with building this model, which is about 22 feet in diameter. And so this is, again, with one guy sponsoring, and this having another guy, Josh. I set it up in his garage. So this is one thing that I've got film clips or some stills, and also video of me creating this. But then I also have since then started it's another thing that Brian had proposed, like, send you to whatever conference you want to go to. And I went to one called ASOR, it's American Society of Oriental Research. It's basically an archaeologist conference in Boston in November. And for that, I ended up making a lot of video, basically Blender model rendering, which is a 3D sort of CGI development tool. So I've got a lot of video clips as well as images from all that video set, and it's from that work where I'm basically compiling a lot of this into a book. And this book is a little over 200 pages, and altogether I want to say 230 images or something, between some of them rendering, some of them diagrams, some of them just pictures to help contextualize things. And so it's a really thorough workout, comparing the different tabernacle models. At this point, I've basically been in the process of finishing the book this week. When I say finishing it, it's not yet edited, and I don't have the cover made for it yet. But other than that, it's all the other real work is done. And so I guess getting into pre-orders, I was debating whether or not I wanted to put something on Facebook. I guess at this point I would just encourage anyone who's interested in early order to just shoot me an email or even give me a call, whatever. Because I actually have one friend who's put in an order, but he also padded my budget. So now he's kind of forcing me making a hardcover copy. So thanks, Eric. But yeah, you're making more work for me. So I'm because softcover CreateSpace was kind of my first pass. I've got some software companies that have been interested in some of the content, but I think at this point between CreateSpace and also Kindle to handle some of the video clips, because what I have literally is transforming just about every item in what I call the shoebox rectangular model, into this round one, so people can see with their own eyes is the things reshape and because in a lot of the text, the Bible text, the shapes are not defined, the lengths are not defined, the weights are not defined. They're largely defined by function, and this is where I'm sorry, but your King James can't hold a candle to the Hebrew, and I say that. Consider the Teruma Parsha between Exodus 25 and 27, and what you will see if you look up the word side, S-I-D-E in English, and what you'll see is that comes from, I want to say 7 or 9 Hebrew words. I think it's 9. I think there's 7 used in the tabernacle area, but 9 if you're including the stuff talking about the Ark of the Covenant and so forth. So they translate that many different Hebrew words into the word side, S-I-D-E. That's because they don't know what's being described, and that they're not considering the fullness of the Hebrew description of every single word, the particular exact accuracy, etc. That they just trampled it underfoot, and so I'm trying to restore this in people's minds between giving them the visual crutch and trying to make some of these points about the translation. I don't go it's not a very Hebrew intensive book. I tried to make this so that, a 6th grader could read their way through it and understand it. And with the number of pictures I have in there, it's, you wouldn't even have to understand English to understand how this thing translates from rectangular to round. I mean, you would not need to understand English just scrolling through it. So that's another kind of benefit of having taken all that video or developed all that video and turning it into other video into I lost my train of thought. Video into just the stills, taking the still samples along the way. That's again, pictures worth 1,000 words, and I've got 22 or 230 pictures. So you do the math there.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. So when do you think you're going to be done and actually have it out released to where people can get it?
Well, I dream of Pi Day. Actually, I launched my website on 3/14/15. So that year, March 14th, 2015, happened to be the day of the Pekudi reading. So Pekudi is the second description in the Torah talking about this tabernacle, Exodus 37, 38, 39, something like that. I'd have to just verify the scope of Pekudi, but it's so much a repeat of what's in Teruma. But that parsha, the reading for that section of the Old Testament there was that fell on the day 3/14/15 in 2015. So 31415 is pi to a little bit more accurate number, of course. And the fact that they fell on the same day, I'm like, wow, this is weird. I ended up launching my website on that day. I think I set up the model. I started setting it up on 6/28 the summer, which is 6/28 is 2 times pi. Tau is the constant for that. So, and then I think I finished the erection on what would have been the Hebrew calendar, the 3rd month, the 14th day of the 3rd month. I think I finished on that, and some of that was I mean, I did not put that much forethought into launching it. So if I can finish it by 3/14/18, I think that's a fairly realistic target. Some of it comes out on how much I don't think I'll have too much editing burden because of the again, there's more visual content in it than written, and all that layout. It actually took me longer to lay it out than it did to write it, because these ideas have been rattling around through my head, and I've been regurgitating them so many times since I started the project. That writing the thing was for me it was a cakewalk. To get all the image formatting has been a lot more effort. So
Hey, you better get busy.
You're saying I'm not.
Yeah, right. Yeah, not enough hours in the day.
No.
I understand,
But,
brother. Well, yeah,
that
timeline.
speaks. That speaks to part of my problem. I've had a few helping hands along the way. Between Brian and Eric and Josh and Allie and Mom and with Rob and yourself but by and large, it's like I am my own graphics artist. Did I go to school for that? No. Do I have to learn how to run Photoshop or Photoshop-esque? I run GIMP. It's a freebie equivalent. Then I've had to wear so many hats, too many hats in this project. I've been grossly inefficient because I'm also essentially very marginally funded. When I say marginally funded, if I can't make this go of this book, I have to shut down the project. Basically, is because I don't, I've been running in the red for as long as the project's been, in conception or inception. As long as it's been, something working, I haven't put my number one priority on funding. I've been pushing for feasibility. Again, like the model demonstrates beyond a reasonable doubt, proof of concept. Hey, we got something that stands up, and it stands up with all the parts described in the Bible. It doesn't take extras, and it won't fall down. It took, I say 6 months plus to say that, but I also have this thing where I could, take it to a place, a feast site or a church or synagogue, and people want to see how the tabernacle worked. I can show you in a very practical way. It helps to have other people set it up because it's part of the erection plan is using 1,500, 2,000 men. So when you're one guy, it's kind of hard to solo that. But so I'm hoping that people will find this of interest, not only of interest, of importance, to say, hey, let's fund this. I have a quote from James, and he's an engineer out in Colorado who's got an engineering company, and to make this so you can have it stand in it. Again, I have the concept all down, but he knows all the building code stuff. I don't deal with building codes, regular thing. Unless I have to go dig it up, then it's 4 times less efficient for me to learn it from the first time. So this whole project has been so grossly inefficient in my mind, anyway, as far as what could be accomplished. You're making mention of the Zodiac before. Well, I had a notion to start more of a research branch of this whole thing, and getting into tapping into this knowledge base based on the the paradigm shift within the text. And there's a lot of really fascinating avenues of research, but a lot of cases my research is got to go downhill because I gotta learn how to generate a light source in a 3D modeling program and all this stuff, because again I don't have a staff. I don't have a it's not like I'm running Focus on the Family here or something. You got millions of dollars from the churches pouring in, which is kind of another point of irony. Is like this, I'm trying to do this work which more resembles anything Levitical that anyone's done in 2,000 years, and it just doesn't seem that the people who are the biggest advocates to the idea of returning to the Torah to want to fund something like this is, to me, it's very peculiar, perplexing. I don't understand it. Maybe this is like a case like David. Okay, you get the pattern, but you're not the guy to build it. I have to accept that as a possibility. But on the other hand, I think it's just a shame. Moses, it took Moses 40 years between where he said, hey, I'm going to try to lead you guys all out of Egypt, and between it actually took place. So I don't know, maybe I have to be 80 before we start building. I hope not. And in the
Perhaps
meantime,
you can get somebody interested in building a church in that shape. Because, they're more apt to fund a church than they are something like this. So.
Yeah, getting into the ideological reservations on that. With this being holy and for holy things and purposes. Do we start putting idols in this? And where's the
yeah, right, true that.
Where's a certain respect and reverence and rightful balance? I mean, in what capacity should this be used?
Right.
And I think, again, to start with educational, I would like to go with the third scale. James, which would basically be a floor footprint of almost 60 feet wide.
Wow.
I would like to make that so it's walk-in. I would like to make that so
that would be cool.
You could take it to a church or synagogue and set it up in a parking lot or in a baseball field or something like that. I mean, this is.
Have you talked to that guy, Ken Ham, that's got the Creation Museum?
I have not. I think it's ironic his last name is Ham, and you have Ham.
We got 2 minutes remaining, brother, so I want to give you a chance for a final comment and whatever you want to leave the audience with lasting thought.
Well, I guess I hope that they'd start seeing merit for something like this. I see that there is some interest looking at website hits and all that and video views, but I find it kind of strange that people find it cosmology to be a more beckoning call than like let's build God's house. To me this. Like I said before, I just don't compute, and maybe that's because this is, my discovery per se. A lot of cases there's limits too. I don't necessarily want everyone's help, because not every person who comes up to help will actually help. I've been set back. Right, I've been set back by people who've been claiming that they're interested in helping, and that just makes my blood boil.
Fully.
Yeah, makes my blood boil on that.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, so I'm just looking for people who are looking for willing to back something that is bigger than themselves. This is bigger than me, and I can't do it alone. Moses, didn't say that the whole congregation came and prayed for Moses that materials would fall out of the sky. Hate to resort to sarcasm for my closing remarks, but where is it that the people at what point are they going to be inspired? There's the Iranians. I'm expecting maybe help from the Persians, the Iranians, anyone who thinks Trump is Cyrus or whatever, because that's how it got built. Maybe it's funding, funding through secular sources. I don't know.
All right, brother. We're at the end here.
Oh, great. I know it's worth doing. So I thank you for your time, Zen, and for your audience as well. So I hope they
It was our pleasure.
We'll
pick it up another time.